Hi everyone, I'm back with my top 10 highlights for Mounce chapter 22. Let me start off by saying this. With chapter 22, you're moving into what Mounce calls functional Greek. What he says is this. In this third and final section of Greek for the rest of us, we will become functional in the use of traditional Greek-English interlinears. In order to do so, we must learn a lot more technical information about Greek. That's his quote from the introductory page to this third and final section of Greek for the rest of us. But what I would say is that while the second of those two sentences is true, in order to do so, we must learn a lot more technical information about Greek. That's true. This part of GRU has a lot more technical information. But a lot of that technical information is read over information, not retain information. I would also say the first sentence is misleading. The first sentence says, in this third and final section of Greek for the rest of us, we'll become functional in the use of traditional Greek-English interlinears. But the reason that sentence is misleading is because you don't need all this information to be functional with an interlinear. You do need it to be fully functional. There's a difference. When I say fully functional, I mean what Mounce does in this third section is introduce you to all the information you are ever likely to want to know when you use an interlinear. So with that introduction, let's move into chapter 22. Chapter 22 is a great example of what I just said. When you first look at it, it seems really complex, really overwhelming, but it really isn't. Let me show you why. The first thing Mounce talks about in chapter 22 are first and second person personal pronouns. In 22:1, Mounce says you need to memorize the different forms of these. You don't. Why? Because your software, when it parses these pronouns, will analyze their forms in terms of case, number, and gender for you. In 22:2, Mounce gives you information that explains word order. That's interesting, but do you need to know this peculiarity about personal pronouns? No, because you already know word order doesn't work in Greek like it does in English. Mounce could have said this about personal pronouns earlier when he first introduced them to you and illustrated it, but he didn't do it there, so he does it here. You don't really need to know this. In 22:3, Mounce talks about accents. Accents don't add anything to meaning and reminds you, I hope, of the meaning, maybe, when an emphatic form of a personal pronoun is used. We met those two different forms, the unemphatic and the emphatic form of personal pronouns, when Mounce first introduced them to you. The second thing Mounce talks about in this chapter, in chapter 22, are enclitics, proclitics, and double accents. He does this in 22.4 through 6. Again, accents. Interesting if you like that kind of stuff. And to know Greek thoroughly and to be fully functional, probably you do. But are accents meaningful in any way? Do they change the meaning in any way? The answer to that question is no. The third thing Mounce talks about in chapter 22 is the pronoun autos. In 22:7 through 10, these sections remind you that no memorization, or should remind you no memorization is needed. It's interesting to know what Mounce says in these sections. They're worth reading over, but that's all you need to do. However, in 22:11 and 22:12, this is new information. And it's actually the first new information, really new information about pronouns in this whole chapter. What it tells you is that sometimes the personal pronoun can be used like an adjective, intensifying a noun that it modifies. And that when that happens, it'll come before or after the noun, but not between the noun and its definite article. That's what predicate position means. It means that a modifier comes before or after the noun that it modifies, but never between the noun and the definite article, never with a definite article in front of it. So when you're reading an interlinear and you see that autos is translated himself or herself or themselves, that's an intensifying adjective. And that's why autos is being translated not just he or she or we. It's being translated himself, herself, or itself, or themselves. Then Mounce tells you that sometimes autos can mean same, an identical adjective. Do you need to know that? No, that's technical information, grammatical information. What you'll see is that autos can mean same sometimes in translation, and maybe you'll wonder why, and you'll turn back to this chapter on autos by looking in Mounce in the subject index. The last thing Mounce talks about in this chapter, in chapter 22, are demonstrative pronouns. And in 22:15, he introduces them to you. This is the second section of new information about pronouns that you'll meet in this chapter. This is probably the most useful most useful section for you, because it introduces you to demonstrative pronouns. Demonstrative pronouns, I love their name, they demonstrate something. They say this book, that light, those people. Mounce covers them in 22:16 through 19, and the information there is worth reading over once, but it's only explaining word order in 16, and only explaining why English translations translate demonstrative pronouns the way they do sometimes in 22:17 and 22:18. 22:19 just talks about word order again, and not in any new way. So the most important thing about this fourth section of chapter 22 on demonstrative pronouns is just to understand that when you see this or that, you're going to be looking at hutos or kenos in Greek. They are the two demonstrative pronouns. Hutos means this, kenos means that. And you'll see them in the Greek when you're using your interlinear.